The early morning sunlight streamed through the large airport windows as Marcus Thompson adjusted his blue backpack nervously. At 17, this was his first time flying alone, and the first-class ticket in his hand still felt surreal. His school had surprised him with it after he won the state science fair, a recognition of his groundbreaking research on renewable energy solutions. Standing at 5'9", with a neat haircut and wearing pressed khaki pants and a crisp white button-down shirt, Marcus looked every bit the honor student he was. His mother had helped him pick out the outfit the night before, wanting to make sure he looked professional for both the flight and the national science competition he would be attending in Boston. "Remember to be extra polite, baby," his mother's words echoed in his mind as he walked down the jet bridge to Flight 2317. He had arrived 2 hours early, just as she had insisted, and was among the first passengers to board the plane. At the aircraft door, flight attendant Karen Dawson's welcoming smile suddenly froze when she saw Marcus. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and her greeting came out noticeably cooler than it had been for the passengers before him. Marcus pretended not to notice, instead offering a polite good morning as he showed her his boarding pass. "First class?" Karen's voice carried a hint of disbelief as she double-checked his ticket. "Are you sure you're on the right flight?" Marcus nodded respectfully, even as he felt his chest tighten. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 3A, he pointed to his boarding pass, where the seat assignment was clearly printed. Karen examined the ticket for an uncomfortably long time before reluctantly stepping aside. As Marcus walked toward first class, he could feel her eyes following his every move. Other passengers were now boarding, but Karen seemed more interested in watching Marcus than greeting them. Finding his seat, Marcus carefully stored his backpack in the overhead compartment, just as his mother had practiced with him at home. The leather seat felt soft and spacious, a far cry from the economy seats he was used to when traveling with his family. He took out his phone to text his mother that he had boarded safely, following the detailed checklist she had given him. 10 minutes passed as other passengers filled the cabin. Marcus noticed that Karen kept walking past his seat, each time looking at him as if she expected him to be doing something wrong. He kept his movements small and deliberate, remembering his mother's advice about not drawing attention to himself. When the seat next to him remained empty after general boarding finished, Marcus thought he might have the luck of extra space for the 3-hour flight. However, Karen's constant surveillance was making him increasingly uncomfortable. He tried to focus on his science competition notes, but her shadow passing by every few minutes made it difficult to concentrate. Finally, needing to rest before the long day ahead, Marcus pressed the call button to request a pillow. It was a service clearly listed in the first-class amenities brochure in his seat pocket. Karen approached, her face tight with barely concealed suspicion. "Yes," she asked, her tone sharp. "Could I please have a pillow?" Marcus asked politely, making sure to maintain eye contact despite his growing discomfort. Karen crossed her arms. First-class passengers usually request those during boarding. Her emphasis on first class made Marcus's stomach sink. "I'm sorry, I didn't know," he replied softly. "The brochure says we can request them anytime during the flight." "Let me see your boarding pass again," Karen demanded, loud enough for nearby passengers to turn and look. Marcus reached for his ticket in the seat pocket, his hand slightly shaking now. In the seat across the aisle, a middle-aged Asian woman in a business suit looked up from her laptop, her brow furrowed as she observed the interaction. "I think there must be some mistake," Karen announced, even as she held the valid ticket in her hands. "This doesn't seem right. Are you sure you didn't take someone else's boarding pass?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Several passengers were now openly watching the scene unfold. Marcus felt his face grow hot with humiliation, but he kept his voice steady, just as his parents had taught him. "No, ma'am. That's my ticket. My school gave it to me for winning the state science fair. I'm heading to a national competition in Boston." But Karen had already pulled out her phone, her fingers typing quickly. "We'll just have to verify this," she said, turning away from Marcus. "Security should be able to sort this out quickly." The woman across the aisle was now openly frowning, her laptop forgotten as she watched the scene unfold with growing concern. Little did anyone know, she would soon play a crucial role in what was about to happen next. Karen returned 5 minutes later with the head flight attendant, Mike Wilson, a tall man with graying hair who looked tired before the flight had even begun. By now, at least 6 passengers had their phones out, quietly recording the situation. The woman across the aisle, Dr. Sarah Chen, had placed her laptop in her bag and sat with her arms crossed, watching everything closely. "Young man," Mike began, his voice carrying through the quiet cabin, "I understand there's some confusion about your seating assignment." Before Marcus could respond, Karen jumped in. "He claims he has a first-class ticket, but something doesn't seem right. I've never seen a teenager in first class traveling alone." She spoke as if Marcus wasn't even there. Dr. Chen cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me, but I've been watching this whole situation. This young man has shown his ticket multiple times, and he's been nothing but polite. What exactly is the problem here?" Karen's face reddened. "Ma'am, this is an airline matter. We need to ensure everyone is in their correct seat for safety reasons." Marcus took a deep breath and pulled out not just his boarding pass, but also his student ID and the letter from his school about the science competition. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Here are all my documents, sir," he said to Mike. "I can show you my ID as well. My school bought this ticket for me because I'm representing them at the National Science Competition in Boston." More passengers were turning around in their seats now. An elderly gentleman in row 2 spoke up. "I heard him earlier. He's going to a science competition. Leave the boy alone. He's done nothing wrong." Mike examined Marcus's documents carefully while Karen stood by, tapping her foot impatiently. The tension in the first-class cabin grew with each passing moment. A businessman in row 4 had stopped his pre-flight phone call to watch. Even a few passengers from economy class were standing in the aisle, trying to see what was happening. "Everything appears to be in order," Mike said finally, handing the documents back to Marcus. But Karen wasn't finished. "You could have gotten these documents from anywhere," she insisted. "I really think we need to contact security. Better safe than sorry." Dr. Chen stood up then, her professional demeanor commanding attention. "I'm recording this interaction," she announced clearly. "And I'd like to know exactly what makes you think this young man's documents aren't legitimate. He's shown more ID than any other passenger has been asked to provide." Other passengers murmured in agreement. A young couple in row 5 had their phones pointed directly at Karen, who was now shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. "It's standard procedure," Karen said weakly, but everyone could hear the falsehood in her words. "Is it standard procedure to only question black teenagers?" Dr. Chen pressed, her voice firm but controlled. "Because I've been flying first class for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this." The cabin grew so quiet you could hear the distant sound of luggage being loaded below. Marcus sat perfectly still, his science competition documents still spread neatly on his tray table. His mother's words rang in his ears. "Stay calm, stay dignified, and let them show who they really are." Karen's face had turned an even deeper shade of red. "I'm calling security," she announced, turning sharply on her heel. "This is becoming a disruption to other passengers." "The only disruption here is you," called out the elderly gentleman from row 2. Several other passengers nodded in agreement. Mike looked deeply uncomfortable now. "Karen, I don't think that's necessary," he started, but she was already halfway down the aisle, speaking rapidly into her phone. Dr. Chen stood up again. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights law. I'd like to speak to the captain immediately." She pulled out a business card from her bag. "And I'm going to need the names of everyone involved in this incident." The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted completely. What started as Karen's suspicious targeting of a black teenager had turned into a public display of discrimination that nobody could ignore. Passengers were now openly discussing what they were witnessing, with many still recording. Marcus remained in his seat, his back straight, his expression composed despite the chaos around him. He thought about the science project waiting in his backpack, his research on creating sustainable energy solutions for underprivileged communities. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he was trying to make the world better for everyone, some people were still judging him solely by the color of his skin. Little did Karen know, her next actions would not only cost her her job, but would also spark a nationwide conversation about racial bias in the airline industry. 3 airport security officers arrived 5 minutes later, their blue uniforms standing out in the crowded first-class cabin. Karen stood near them with her arms crossed, a look of satisfaction on her face. The lead officer, Officer Rodriguez, approached Marcus's seat while the other two officers stood in the aisle. "Sir, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us," Officer Rodriguez said, his tone professional but firm. The officer glanced at the documents still spread on Marcus's tray table, then at the many passengers recording the scene on their phones. Dr. Chen immediately stood up. "Officer, I need to inform you that this young man has done absolutely nothing wrong. I've been watching this entire situation unfold. This is clear discrimination by the flight attendant." The elderly gentleman from row 2 joined in again. "We're all witnesses here. The boy has shown his ticket multiple times. He's been perfectly polite while that flight attendant has been harassing him." Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp. "He's been disruptive and uncooperative. Several passengers have complained." This was met with immediate protests from the cabin. "That's a lie," called out the businessman from row 4. "The only one being disruptive is you." Marcus slowly began gathering his documents, his hands steady despite the situation. He had been taught what to do in moments like this: stay calm, follow instructions, and let the truth come out later. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Sometimes, baby, you have to lose a battle to win the war." Officer Rodriguez looked increasingly uncomfortable as more passengers spoke up in Marcus's defense. The other two officers exchanged glances, clearly sensing that something wasn't right about this situation. "I have everything recorded," Dr. Chen announced, holding up her phone, "including the flight attendant's false claims just now. I'm also going to need all of your badge numbers." She had already pulled out her legal notepad and was writing quickly. Marcus stood up slowly, reaching for his backpack in the overhead bin. "My science project materials are in here," he said quietly. "They're very important. May I confirm that everything is secure before we leave?" His dignified response made several passengers shake their heads in dismay. A mother in row 3 was crying quietly, hugging her own teenage son who looked about Marcus's age. "This is absolutely shameful," the elderly gentleman declared, standing up despite his wife trying to pull him back to his seat. "I've been flying for 50 years, and I've never seen such blatant discrimination." Karen's triumphant expression had started to waver as she realized nearly every passenger in first class was recording and openly opposing her actions. Even some economy passengers had their phones out, filming through the gaps between seats. "Officers," Dr. Chen said firmly, "I'm formally informing you that you're participating in an act of discrimination that's being documented by multiple witnesses. This young man has a valid first-class ticket, proper ID, and documentation explaining his travel purpose. The only reason he's being removed is racial profiling by this flight attendant." The captain emerged from the cockpit, drawn by the commotion. He surveyed the scene. The three security officers, the angry passengers with their phones out, Karen's flushed face, and Marcus standing calmly with his backpack. "What's going on here?" the captain asked, his experienced eyes taking in the situation. Before Karen could speak, several passengers started explaining at once. Dr. Chen raised her voice above the others. "Captain, I'm a civil rights attorney, and what's happening here requires your immediate attention." But it was Marcus who caught everyone's attention when he spoke next. His voice was clear and steady, carrying throughout the now silent cabin. "Sir, I apologize for any disruption. I'm a student traveling to represent my school at the National Science Competition. I have a valid first-class ticket, but if my presence is making anyone uncomfortable, I'm willing to cooperate with the officers. I just need to make sure I don't miss my competition." The simple dignity of his words made the injustice of the situation even more stark. Several passengers were now openly calling for Karen to be removed instead of Marcus. The captain's face grew serious as he looked from Marcus to Karen to the numerous phones recording everything. What happened in the next 15 minutes would change not just Marcus's day, but would send ripples through the entire airline industry. While Marcus was being escorted through the terminal, Dr. Sarah Chen was already making things happen. Her fingers moved quickly across her phone screen as she sent the video to 3 different contacts: her law firm's civil rights division, the airline's corporate office, and a trusted journalist at the local news station. Years of handling discrimination cases had taught her the importance of quick action. The other passengers weren't sitting quietly either. The videos from the incident were spreading across social media like wildfire. The elderly gentleman, who turned out to be Mr. James Wilson, a retired school principal, had his grandson on FaceTime helping him post the video to Twitter. The young couple from row 5 had already shared their recording on TikTok, where it was gaining thousands of views by the minute. In the airport terminal, Marcus sat quietly on a bench, his backpack clutched close. Officer Rodriguez stayed with him, looking increasingly worried as he received radio messages about the situation blowing up on social media. The officer had removed his sunglasses and was now speaking to Marcus in a much gentler tone. "Son, would you like some water?" Officer Rodriguez asked, clearly trying to make up for what he now realized was a serious mistake. Marcus politely declined, instead taking out his phone to call his mother. Back on the plane, chaos had erupted. Karen was trying to continue her pre-flight duties as if nothing had happened, but passengers weren't having it. The businessman from row 4, Mr. David Kumar, was on the phone with the airline's customer service, demanding to speak to his supervisor. "No, I will not hold," he said firmly. A young man was just wrongfully removed from this flight, and everyone here saw it happen. The captain had returned to the cockpit to contact the airline's operations center. Even he could see the situation was rapidly spinning out of control. The flight was already delayed by 20 minutes, and passengers were refusing to settle down. Exactly 12 minutes after Marcus's removal, the first response from airline headquarters came through. Sarah Chen's phone rang. It was the airline's regional director of operations, Michael Torres. He had seen the videos and was already heading to the airport from his office nearby. "Dr. Chen," he said urgently, "I'm 8 minutes away from the terminal. Can you please stay on that plane? We're going to fix this immediately." Karen was starting to look nervous. The confident smirk she had worn earlier was gone, replaced by a worried frown as she noticed more and more passengers shooting video in her direction. Every time she walked past, someone made a comment about discrimination or asked for her employee number. The mother who had been crying earlier had stopped her tears and was now angry. "My son is the same age as that boy," she told the passengers around her. "He flies alone all the time for his tennis tournaments. Nobody has ever questioned his right to be in first class." Her words struck a chord with everyone who heard them. 13 minutes after Marcus's removal, something remarkable happened. Videos of the incident had reached several major news outlets. The airline's social media team was overwhelmed with messages. #Justice for Marcus was trending locally, and the story was spreading nationally. At the 14-minute mark, Michael Torres burst through the terminal doors, slightly out of breath from running from his car. He spotted Marcus immediately, the calm teenager sitting with his backpack, speaking quietly to Officer Rodriguez. What happened next would show everyone the difference between a company that talks about diversity and one that takes real action. Torres approached Marcus directly, extended his hand, and said the words that would soon make headlines. "Mr. Thompson, on behalf of our airline, I want to apologize for the completely unacceptable treatment you've received. We're going to make this right." Back on the plane, passengers watched through their windows as Marcus stood up to speak with the regional director. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed with a message. The airline's legal team wanted to speak with her immediately. The businessman's video had reached 50,000 views. The retired principal's grandson called to say that national news networks were picking up the story. 15 minutes after her triumphant moment of having Marcus removed, Karen's world was about to turn upside down. As she arranged cups in her service cart, trying to pretend everything was normal, she had no idea that the next person walking onto the plane would be her regional director, and he wasn't coming to support her decision. Sometimes, justice moves slowly. But sometimes, in the age of social media and witnesses who refuse to stay silent, it takes just 15 minutes to begin making things right. Michael Torres walked onto the plane with Marcus close behind him. The entire cabin fell silent. Karen's face turned pale when she saw her boss entering with the very passenger she had just removed. Torres's expression was serious as he surveyed the first-class cabin, noting the many phones still recording. "Ladies and gentlemen," Torres announced, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin, "I'm Michael Torres, Regional Director for the airline. First, I want to apologize to everyone for the delay and especially to Mr. Thompson for the completely unacceptable treatment he received." Karen started to speak. "Sir, I can explain." "Not now, Karen," Torres cut her off firmly. "Please go to the terminal and wait in the staff room. We'll discuss this shortly." His tone left no room for argument. As Karen walked off the plane, several passengers clapped. The elderly Mr. Wilson gave Marcus a thumbs up as the young man returned to his seat in first class. Dr. Chen was already deep in conversation with Torres, showing him the videos she had recorded. Torres stood at the front of the first-class cabin. "I want to hear from anyone who witnessed what happened. We take discrimination very seriously, and there will be a full investigation." Hands shot up all over the cabin. The businessman, Mr. Kumar, played his video, which clearly showed Karen's hostile behavior. The mother with the teenage son shared her recording of Karen's false claim about passenger complaints. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of what had happened. Meanwhile, in the terminal staff room, Karen sat alone, her hands shaking as she checked her phone. The videos had gone viral. Her face was all over social media, with people calling her first-class Karen and demanding she be fired. She had never imagined her actions would have such widespread consequences. Back on the plane, Torres was taking detailed notes as passengers shared their accounts. Dr. Chen had switched into full lawyer mode, documenting everything professionally. "We'll need statements from everyone," she said. "This isn't just about one incident, it's about preventing this from happening to anyone else." The captain emerged from the cockpit again, this time to apologize personally to Marcus. "Young man," he said, "I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. That won't happen again on my watch." Torres made quick decisions to handle the situation. He announced that all passengers would receive travel vouchers for their patients. He personally checked Marcus's schedule and arranged for priority handling of his luggage to ensure he wouldn't miss any of his science competition. In the staff room, Karen was called in to meet with Torres and the airline's HR representative who had rushed to the airport. The meeting was brief but serious. Karen tried to defend her actions, claiming she was just following security protocols, but the videos told a different story. "Karen," Torres said firmly, "in your 15 years with this airline, have you ever asked any other first-class passenger to show multiple forms of ID? Have you ever called security on a properly ticketed passenger who was sitting calmly in their assigned seat?" Karen's silence was telling. The HR representative slid a document across the table. "Administrative leave papers, effective immediately, pending a full investigation." Back on the plane, things were finally settling down. Marcus sat in his first-class seat, now with an extra pillow and a complimentary meal voucher. Dr. Chen had given him her card, promising to follow up on the incident. Other passengers kept coming by to express their support. Torres made one final announcement before leaving the plane. "Our airline is committed to providing a safe, respectful environment for all passengers. What happened today was unacceptable, and we will take all necessary steps to address it. Mr. Thompson, we're honored to have you on our flight." As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, 45 minutes behind schedule, Marcus looked out his window and thought about everything that had happened. His phone was filled with supportive messages from his mother, who was both proud of how he handled himself and angry about what he had experienced. What no one knew yet was that this incident would lead to major changes in airline policies and training programs across the industry. Karen's 15 minutes of poor judgment would result in improved travel experiences for countless future passengers. The flight attendant who replaced Karen gave Marcus a friendly smile as she passed. "Can I get you anything?" she asked warmly. "A blanket, perhaps, or some hot chocolate?" For the first time since boarding the plane, Marcus relaxed in his seat. Sometimes, he realized, justice comes swiftly, especially when good people refuse to stay silent in the face of discrimination. The flight landed in Boston right on schedule, despite its delayed departure. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus was surprised to see flashing lights from news cameras through the terminal windows. Word of the incident had spread fast, and local media had gathered to cover the story. Mr. Torres had called ahead, and a special airline representative waited at the gate to escort Marcus through the terminal. Sarah Martinez, the airline's customer experience director, greeted him with a warm smile and a VIP access badge. "Mr. Thompson," she said professionally, "we've arranged everything for you. Your science project materials will be brought directly from the plane, and we have a car waiting to take you to your competition venue." As they walked through the terminal, several travelers recognized Marcus from the viral videos. A young girl pointed and said to her mother, "Look, that's the boy who stood up to the mean lady." Marcus smiled politely but kept walking, remembering his mother's advice about staying focused on what really mattered. In the VIP lounge, Sarah Martinez presented Marcus with an official letter from the airline's CEO. "We're not just apologizing," she explained. "We're taking action. The airline would like to offer you a full scholarship for your college education." Marcus sat quietly, reading the letter. The scholarship would cover 4 years of tuition at any university he chose. His hands trembled slightly as he realized what this meant. His parents' biggest worry about his future had just been solved. "There's more," Sarah continued. "We'd like you to be part of our new youth advisory board. We want to work with young people like you to make sure our airline truly serves everyone fairly." Meanwhile, back at the departure airport, Karen was dealing with the consequences of her actions. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages. News fans had gathered outside the airline's office, waiting for an official statement. Her union representative had called to say that even they couldn't defend her actions, given the clear video evidence. The airline's HR department was reviewing years of passenger complaints, looking for any patterns in Karen's behavior. They found several previous incidents where minority passengers had reported unfair treatment, but none had been as well documented as this one. In Boston, Marcus's story was having an unexpected positive impact. The science competition organizers had seen the news and were deeply impressed by how he had handled himself. Before the competition even began, several universities had reached out, interested in meeting the young scientist who had shown such poise under pressure. Dr. Chen, who had been on her way to a legal conference in Boston, arrived at her hotel and immediately got to work. She drafted a comprehensive proposal for airline industry reforms, using Marcus's experience as a catalyst for change. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from other civil rights attorneys wanting to join the effort. The airline's corporate office was moving quickly, too. By evening, they had announced a major overhaul of their training programs. All staff would undergo enhanced anti-bias training. New guidelines were being written to prevent discriminatory treatment of passengers. Karen's actions had exposed a problem, but Marcus's dignity in handling it had inspired solutions. Marcus finally arrived at the science competition venue, his project safely transported by the airline's special handling team. As he set up his renewable energy display, other students gathered around. They had all seen the videos and wanted to hear his story. But Marcus stayed focused on his purpose. "The science is what matters," he told them, adjusting his solar panel demonstration. "That's why I'm here." Sarah Martinez watched from a distance as Marcus prepared for his presentation. She had just gotten off the phone with the airline's marketing team, who wanted to feature Marcus's story in their new training materials. But they would wait to ask him. Today was about his science project. By evening, two big things had happened. Marcus had won first place in his category at the science competition, and Karen had been officially terminated from her position with the airline. The contrast was striking. While one person's discriminatory actions had ended her career, another person's dignified response had launched his. As Marcus called his parents with the good news about his win, he couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just one day. Sometimes, you realize, standing up for what's right isn't about being the loudest or the angriest. It's about staying true to yourself and letting justice take its course. 1 week after the incident, the airline's corporate headquarters buzzed with activity. The CEO, James Anderson, sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by his executive team. On the wall-mounted screens, videos from Marcus's incident played silently. They had become a powerful reminder of why this meeting was necessary. "This stops today," Anderson announced, his voice firm. "We're not just going to apologize and move on. We're going to make real changes." He looked around the room at his team, many of whom had barely slept in the past week dealing with this crisis. The company's new chief diversity officer, Dr. Patricia Washington, stood up to present their action plan. She had been hired within days of the incident, brought in from a major university where she had led successful diversity initiatives. "First," Dr. Washington began, "we're completely rebuilding our training program. Every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots, will go through our new anti-bias training. And this isn't just a one-time thing, it will be ongoing." The marketing team displayed their new campaign, "Everyone flies first class here." It wasn't just about seating categories anymore. It was about treating every passenger with first-class respect, regardless of their ticket type, appearance, or background. In another part of the building, HR managers were reviewing employee policies. Karen's case had exposed gaps in their system. They found that previous complaints about discriminatory behavior hadn't been properly tracked or addressed. That was changing now. "We're implementing a new reporting system," the HR director explained to her team. "Passengers can report discrimination through our app, website, or by scanning a QR code on their boarding pass. Every complaint will be investigated thoroughly." The airline's social media team was working overtime too. They had turned a PR disaster into an opportunity for positive change. Photos showed diverse groups of employees in training sessions, learning about unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. Meanwhile, Marcus's story had caught the attention of major civil rights organizations. The airline invited these groups to help design their new policies. Dr. Chen, who had witnessed the original incident, was now leading a task force on airline industry reform. The changes weren't just on paper. At airports across the country, new signs went up. "Discrimination has no seat here." Flight attendants began wearing pins that said, "Respect first," a reminder of their commitment to treating all passengers with dignity. Karen's termination had sent a clear message throughout the industry. Other airlines started reviewing their own policies, afraid of similar incidents. What happened to Marcus had become a wake-up call for the entire aviation sector. The airline's investment in change was substantial. They committed $50 million to their diversity initiative, including scholarships for minority students interested in aviation careers, partnership programs with historically black colleges and universities, community outreach programs in underserved areas, advanced training programs for all staff, new technology for tracking and addressing discrimination complaints. But perhaps the most significant change was in the company's hiring process. "We're not just looking for people who can serve drinks and give safety demonstrations," the head of recruitment explained. "We're looking for people who understand that respect and dignity are just as important as any other skill." The airline's stock price, which had dropped after the incident, began to recover as investors saw their serious commitment to change. Other companies started calling, wanting to learn from their new protocols and training programs. Back in the CEO's office, Anderson looked at a framed photo that now hung on his wall. It showed Marcus at his science competition, smiling with his first-place trophy. The photo was there to remind everyone that behind every policy change were real people whose lives were affected by their decisions. "This isn't just about avoiding bad publicity," Anderson told his team. "It's about being the kind of company that makes people feel safe and respected." Marcus showed us what dignity looks like. Now it's our job to make sure no one else has to show such courage just to sit in the seat they paid for. The incident that began with one flight attendant's prejudice had sparked a movement of change throughout the airline industry. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to create real transformation. As Dr. Washington often said in her training sessions, change happens when staying the same is no longer an option. And for this airline, staying the same was definitely no longer an option. 1 year had passed since the incident that changed not just Marcus Thompson's life, but the entire airline industry. On a bright spring morning, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at the airline's training center. Now 18 and a high school senior, he had grown an inch taller and carried himself with even more confidence. "My story could have ended with anger," Marcus told the room full of airline employees. Instead, it became about change. The audience included flight attendants, pilots, gate agents, and executives from airlines across the country. They had gathered for the first national conference on inclusive air travel, and Marcus was the keynote speaker. In the front row sat Dr. Sarah Chen, who had witnessed everything that day. She smiled proudly as Marcus shared his experience. Next to her sat Michael Torres, now promoted to Vice President of Customer Relations, and Dr. Patricia Washington, the airline's Chief Diversity Officer. The changes over the past year had been remarkable. The airline's new training program, inspired by Marcus's experience, had become the industry standard. Other airlines had copied their Respect First policy, and passenger complaints about discrimination had dropped by 85% across all major carriers. Karen's story had taken a different turn. After losing her job, she had gone through a period of deep reflection. The viral videos of her actions had forced her to confront her own biases. Now, surprisingly, she worked with an anti-discrimination organization, sharing her story as a cautionary tale and an example of how unconscious bias could ruin careers and hurt people. Marcus's life had changed too. The airline's scholarship meant he could attend any college he chose. He had been accepted to MIT, where he planned to study environmental engineering. His science project on renewable energy, which he had presented that day in Boston, had won national recognition. But perhaps the most significant change was the youth advocacy group Marcus had started called First Class Justice. The organization helped young people stand up against discrimination while promoting education and professional development. The airline had become their biggest supporter, providing internships and mentoring programs. What happened that day showed me something important, Marcus continued in his speech. When good people stand up together, real change is possible. He looked at the familiar faces in the audience: Mr. Wilson, the elderly gentleman who had supported him, Mr. Kumar, the businessman who had recorded everything, and the mother who had cried for her own son. The airline's new training video, which included footage from that day, ended with a powerful message. Dignity is not a privilege, it's a right. New employees watched Marcus's story during their orientation, learning how one incident had transformed an entire industry. Statistics showed the impact. Diverse hiring in the airline industry had increased by 40%. Customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. The airline's Everyone Flies First Class Here campaign had won marketing awards, but more importantly, it had changed the company's culture. After his speech, Marcus met with a group of young airport employees. One of them asked how he had stayed so calm that day. Marcus smiled and shared his mother's words. Sometimes, the quietest voice speaks the loudest. The airline CEO had kept the framed photo of Marcus at his science competition. Below it now hung a new mission statement: "We don't just fly planes. We lift people up." It wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise born from a moment of injustice that had turned into a movement for change. As Marcus prepared to head to college, he received an unexpected letter. It was from a young black girl who had recently flown first class to her own science competition. "I sat in my seat without fear," she wrote. "Thank you for making that possible." The story that began with discrimination had become a lesson in dignity, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Marcus's quiet courage had shown that sometimes the best response to prejudice isn't anger, but unwavering dignity and a determination to create positive change. The airline industry had learned that first class wasn't just about the width of a seat or the quality of the service. It was about treating every person with first-class respect. And somewhere in the sky every day, planes took off carrying passengers who no longer had to prove they belonged in their seats. As Marcus often said when ending his speeches, "Every seat on these planes is a first-class seat when we treat each other with dignity and respect."